And it's down toward the bottom of the list. It's an article that says editable PDFs forms. And you basically fill out these forms and record them with the land recording office. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be executing a deed of reconveyance, just like when you reconvey a piece of property after it's had a mortgage on it. You're going to be establishing a deed of reconveyance, reconveying your name, your regular trade name that you've used all your life, upper lowercase, back to the land and soil of the state where you were born. That's job one. Once you're standing back on the land and your name has been recorded on the land jurisdiction, you have standing as an American that you assume that you've had all your life. And now you're ready to take control of all of these public trusts and public transmitting utilities that they've spun off of your name. So the next step is to seize control of those all capital letters names. Some people call them straw men. You're going to seize control of those by issuing a certificate of assumed name. And all those forms are there on the website too. And they're in an editable form so that you can clearly see where you need to fill in your information. We made it as simple as we could. Now when you're done with this, you're going to have your name back on the land jurisdiction. You're going to have control of your public trust, your public transmitting utility, and your estate. Now we're in court right now battling with the banks, basically. The banks are the no-goodniks at the bottom of all of this. And mostly it's the Bank of England and Bank of Scotland. No surprises there. What we're trying to do is get all American estates set aside out of the bankruptcy because of the fraud that's been practiced against this entire country. And so far it's looking pretty good. But there's no harm, and there's certainly a great deal of insurance value and benefit in getting your own name dragged out of the bankruptcy slush pile and asserting your own rights as an American on the land. Right now, I'm standing here, I'm a free woman. I'm Teflon. I'm like Bill and Hillary. Bill and Hillary did this process when they were in law school. So that should tell you all something that's worth doing. And it's a wonderful feeling to get up in the morning and not feel terrorized by your own government. I used to get up in the morning and feel terrorized by my own government. I used to have nightmares about the IRS. That was a real problem for me because, number one, it was also complex and I couldn't be absolutely sure that I wasn't 10 cents off, right? Did I remember everything? And I also never liked the idea of signing up and saying that I am under penalty of perjury that I was a withholding agent when nobody ever told me what a withholding agent was. Well, it turns out after a great deal of research in foreign archives, we found out that a withholding agent, in the case of the IRS forms, is swearing under penalty of perjury that you are a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marine Service. And I knew right there and then that I was not going to sign a 1040 ever again in my life because I would be telling a barefaced lie. And I would be subjecting myself to a 2-year stint in the federal prison for signing that paper. So I haven't filed a federal tax form since 1998. And I have no reason to, because I'm not a federal employee. So, people ask me all the time about the IRS. Well, they are presuming that you are operating as a corporation, as a federally chartered corporation, because so far as the public record shows, the only thing with your name on it out there is in international jurisdiction of the sea. So you'll notice that when you get, like when they send out these tax forms and it has pre-printed with your name on it, it's always in capital letters. It's always one of those 3 names that are in capital letters. They're always either trying to tax a public trust, a public estate, or a public transmitting utility. And you're none of the above. In fact, you never knew that these things were being operated in your name. So do you owe any tax? No. Are you a withholding agent? No. No, you're not. And one of the best arguments I ever heard for accusations of non-filing, you know, they always send out these complaints and they say, oh, you're not filing. One of the best answers to failure to file is, oh, I found out what a withholding agent is, and I'm not one. I will swear on a stack of Bibles that I am not a warrant officer in the British Merchant Marines. I will guarantee that. And by the way, trying to force me to file anything that said I was under penalty of perjury would be an inducement to criminal activity. So that just shuts down all these failure to file ideas right there. I'm not in the British Merchant Marines, I'm sorry. You must have someone else in mind. Oh, could you be talking about this corporation that I also have control of? See my certificate of assumed name? Now, just remember what I said about Congressman Louis T. McFadden and his complaint before the House Banking Committee and before the House Judiciary Committee, which still hasn't been acted on since 1934, by the way. He called it unlawful conversion. So what I'm encouraging all of you to do is a lawful conversion. Each one of us individually can take back what they stole from us. We can take back our good name. And when we're talking about the good name, we're talking about the trade name. The trade name is your Christian name. So if you're a Christian, this is also a religious issue. You're taking back your Christian name. I went to court and did an adult name change. I went from being Anna Maria Reisinger, all capital letters, to being Anna Maria Reisinger, upper lowercase. And when the judge came around, he looked at this kind of sideways and he says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm taking back my Christian name." And that was it. That was the end of the entire argument. Boom, right there. You don't need any other excuse for taking back your name to upper lowercase. Now, if you want to go and do that and do an adult name change, you can do that. Most places it's anywhere from $150 to $300 and, you know, something like 6 weeks of process time to do that. I did that because I knew that I was going to be in some intense court battles and I was going to be facing a lot of flack. I think that for Joe Average, who's not going to be in the center of a fight, that the deed of reconveyance that we provide on my website is more than sufficient to make your claim. I don't think everybody can or should have the extra burden of going through an actual court process. But the reason I did it, I wanted something in my hand that proved that they had moved that name back to me, that I had it in my possession, that it was not in any trust or caretaking capacity of the state of, in my case, Alaska. I was stealing back my own trade name, and then I reconveyed it. So that is a closed loop. I got the court order making the change back to the Christian name, upper lowercase. I went and recorded my deed of reconveyance, my acknowledgement, my acceptance, and my deed of reconveyance to the land and soil of Wisconsin, where I was born, with the Alaska Land Recording Office. Then I went back to the I went back to the court with a certified copy of my recording and put it in the case file. So I got the court to officially change the name back to the upper lowercase. I recorded that, reconveyed it to the land and soil. Then I took a certified copy back to the court and had them put it in the name change file so that they were fully and duly noticed. There's absolutely no way that they can claim that they have any more attachment to my name or that they were not given due notice. And that's what I call closing the circle. Wrapping it all up so everybody has due notice. So depending on your situation and how much property you have, I mean, if you're a multimillionaire and you've got, you know, a gazillion acres of property, or you've got businesses that you own, you might want to go get an actual name change back to your upper lowercase name. Otherwise, if you're an average person and you're just living your life and want to be left alone, do the reconveyance and let it be good enough, because that will be good enough for most purposes. I'm just kind of I'm describing my process and what I went through and why I went through it for you, so that you know that that option is out there, depending upon your own situation. So, what to do with all of these tax things? Now, these guys here have developed a wonderful option for you guys to consider in dealing with the IRS. I simply revoked my election to pay. When you first sign a 1040 for the first time, you are signing what's called a novation contract. That's never told to you, and it's very sneakily added to the paperwork. But basically, a novation contract is a contract that is self-perpetuating. If you file it once, there's a presumption that you're going to file the next year, and the next year, and the next year. Let me give you kind of a brief history of the IRS. The IRS, the first income tax ever recorded was in the early 1100s in France and England, and it was called Peter's Pence. And it was a tax levied by the Catholic Church to pay for the costs of the Crusades. And it was collected on the 15th of April every year by members of the Dominican order who wore black robes and were members of the Inquisition. Not much has changed, huh?
What year did they start doing that?
1135 AD. And it remains a voluntary tax. You've probably heard or seen clips where some IRS official will be standing there blinking their eyes and looking confused and saying, but this is a voluntary tax. we're going to take 45% of your earned income, and it's all voluntary. Right? Right. Well, technically it is voluntary. It's just that it was never fully disclosed to you, and you didn't know that you had a choice, and you didn't know how to exercise that choice, and nobody told you, and that's for darn sure. You have the right to revoke your election to pay the income tax if you are Joe Average and are not a federal employee or federal dependent. Now, I don't know right off the top of my head what the citation in the IRS code is, but you don't even have to recite that. What you need to do is send a letter to both the Commissioner of the IRS and the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. There are two. Again, we're dealing with duplicitous names. I mean, who would think that Commissioner of IRS was different than the Commissioner of Internal Revenue Service? But there are two separate offices, and you have to notify both of your revocation of election to pay federal income taxes. Most of us have never been subject to federal income taxes. And most of us were subscribed under provisions that happened after World War II. My mother, who just recently died at age 96, remembered when all of this went down. It was during the war, the Second World War, and Congress came up with the victory tax. It was called the victory tax. And patriotic Americans could voluntarily sign up to pay a portion of their wages, the same as federal employees, for the war effort. And this was done during the war, so there was not a specific end date attached to the program, the victory tax program. It just said at the end of hostilities. Now, by my clock, the Second World War ended in September of 1945 with the final peace treaty between the Imperial Japanese government and the Allies, right? But Congress never went back and actually established an end date for the victory tax. They just kept right on rolling and collecting. And then they went right into the Cold War, right? And then they went into the war on war, and the war on drugs, and the war on poverty, and the war on blah, 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 blah. So that's what they're using as their excuse for continuing to pick your pockets every year. And that's why every president makes a declaration of some kind of war on something. And that's why every president makes a declaration of emergency, national emergency. We just had Donald Trump do it this year. It's so they can keep this ball rolling, and they can keep using military courts, and they can keep using military-style government at the territorial level. Now, we on the land, we've been at peace for 150 years. We haven't gone to war. Land jurisdiction of this country hasn't been at war in 150 years. It's all been the territorial government and the municipal government. We're completely peace-loving. President Andrew Johnson, who was the vice president that took over after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, declared 3 times on the public record that the land jurisdiction was at peace. The land jurisdiction is still at peace. When you sign up and you are in the federal civilian service or military service, you're in a different status. You're working for a different country, in effect. So when you join the service, you are accepting federal citizenship. And as we all know, when you join the service, you're under the rules of the service, right? Suddenly you have to take orders. You have to obey every title and jot of the military code. And you're subject to the military justice code and all of that, right? Well, there's a presumption, since you're not on the land and your name is still at sea, that you're under territorial jurisdiction and that you have to obey their military code.
Well, Anna, when you join the military, you're joining the United States Army, the United States Navy, not the United States of America's Army.
Right, exactly. So that's where the dual citizenship comes in. And since the Vietnam War, you don't even properly get discharged when you leave the service. Most people come out of the service, they get their DD-214, they think, okay, that's that. I'm back in civilian status. I'm wearing my civvies. Okay, I don't have to salute anymore. But in fact, they're never discharged unless they absolutely, again, write a letter to the head of their branch of service and say, here attached is a carbon copy of my DD-214. I have, as of this date, whenever date that is or was, returned to my birthright political status as a national of Texas or Michigan or wherever you were born. Just like you write a letter to the IRS commissioners and tell them, I revoke my election to pay federal taxes. It's the same thing. You have to do it on a personal basis. And when you do this, you need to send it in a registered letter so that you have control of that mailing and you have record of it. You want a return receipt requested. And until you do, they can presume that you are still in the military. They can pull you off the street and put you right back in a uniform and send your butt off to Timbuktu. So you do have to give them notice that you're returning to your birthright political status as a civilian.
Do the court clerks, if you file stuff like that with the local court clerk, is that sufficient to get it done?
The question was, will a court clerk filing suffice? And the answer for the name jurisdiction things is no. The court clerks are territorial or municipal courts. They can't do anything about the land jurisdiction records. And you have to have your name back on the land jurisdiction. Now there are some counties that will not record a deed of reconveyance. They don't really have a good reason for not doing it. They just say they won't. So if your county won't record your deed of reconveyance, moving your name back from the jurisdiction of the sea to the jurisdiction of the land, you find another county that will. Since these are all federated states and federated counties, it doesn't matter where you file it, just that you get it filed in the right jurisdiction, or recorded in the right jurisdiction is the proper way of saying that. So if you go down to your local land recording district office or county office and they try to obstruct your deed of reconveyance, just go down to the next county and keep looking. You'll find one. Yeah?
Yes, I have a question. My husband is a veteran, and if he goes back to do this name change, like you're saying, does that
will they look at this and say, okay, he gets no benefits then from the military? Does that exclude him from receiving what he's getting now?
This process, the question was, if a veteran goes and, gives notice that he's returned to civilian status, will that mean he will lose his benefits? And the answer is that no, it does not mean that you lose any benefits. None of this affects anything that you're owed. It doesn't affect your Social Security, doesn't affect your military retirement or medical benefits.
Way too loud.
This is simply returning all of this property to its proper jurisdiction. It does not affect what you're owed. So if you were vested in the Social Security system, your person is still vested in the Social Security system. If you are owed military retirement, you are still owed that retirement. Just like I could retire from GM and I could move to a different country and I would still get my benefits from GM. It's the same thing. Because remember, the territorial government is a corporation. So is the municipal government a corporation. These are just gigantic, unimaginably huge corporations. So, no, none of this process affects any federal benefits that you're owed. It just affects your status, your political status, and where you're standing, whether you're standing on the sea, or on the land, and how you're standing. Are you standing as a British citizen, or are you standing as an American? Right now, they have you all down as British. I know that sounds bizarre, but the territorial government has been run by Great Britain for 150 years. And so when you have two choices. Either you're a ward, a lawful ward as an American in international jurisdiction, and they have to, under the delegated powers, they have to act as your trustee when you are in international jurisdiction, when you are in a delegated portion of international jurisdiction. So you should be safe. Okay.
Okay, say I go ahead and do my name change, and I send off to the IRS. I don't owe taxes, but I want to tell them that I don't want to ever want them to withhold any taxes or pay taxes. What my standing would be with the federal government, the IRS.
Well, you won't have any trouble from them. What you'll
Okay, but what I'm getting to is, all these years that I paid taxes and filled out that 1040, and I did not know because I was not informed that it was voluntary. Is there any way that I could recoup all the money that I have put into the federal government?
It's spent.
Yes.
Good.
The amount of money that's owed to each one of us is absolutely astronomical. It's unimaginable. Because it's not just what they owe to us, it's what they owe to our great-grandparents and our parents. Virtually everything that you can think of has been rolled forward in generation-skipping trusts. Now, what a generation-skipping trust does is it protects assets from taxation. It's a way of shielding assets. And basically what it does is it knocks it forward to the next generation. So if you just go along with the program as it is now established, all of the money that you're owed, that you paid in for mortgages, and that you paid in for taxes that you didn't know, all of that is going to be reinvested by gigantic investment funds. That's all going to get knocked down the road to the next generation. But if they don't know any more than you did and they don't claim it, it's just going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. And nobody who's alive, except the pension fund managers and the politicians, will ever see any benefit from it.
Steve here from San Antonio. Everybody hear me? Now, why don't you go over to the mic?
This may be common amongst people having legal name changes already. Obviously, I would be reconveying my birth name as opposed to my new legal name for being adopted.
Right.
So how would I bind those two together? I should be focused. If I'm doing a deed of reconveyance, I'm charting my birth name,
Right.
and then somehow adding an addendum to that process with my assumed legal name.
Right, you can have a large number of assumed names. Now, when I was born, the name I was given was Anna Maria Wilhelmina Hanna Sophia Reisinger von Reichenstein von Lettow Verbeck.
Wow, you were special.
Can you imagine being a little kid trying to learn how to spell your name? Anyway, there was no way that that moniker fit into any of these systems. So what they did is they just grabbed the first name of each segment, you know, the first name, the first middle name, and the first last name, and that was arbitrarily, for their purposes, the public name, the trade name that they seized upon. Now, years went by and I decided to become a writer of sorts, to at least to the extent that I'd write this stuff down so that people knew it. And so I took a pen name. And what I did was I just shortened my next name to von Reitz instead of von Reichenstein. So I have a pen name. And when I went through and claimed all my assumed names, I claimed my pen name and all sorts of variations and combinations, as well as my presumed birth name. So when you have a pen name or a nickname or a married name or any name that you've ever used in business at all, go ahead and claim that as an assumed name. You don't have to reconvey anything except the trade name that you were given, which is your upper lowercase first, middle, last. Once you reconvey that one, which is the name that appears on your birth certificate, only upper lowercase, once you reconvey that one, you can seize upon all of the other variations, all the uppercase variations by a certificate of assumed name. And I get this question from women quite often is, I had a maiden name and now I have a married name, or I had a maiden name, a married name, and I got divorced. And what do I do? Well, you claim all the variations as assumed names so that you're in control of those names if you ever get hauled into court for anything. I've had... Yes?
Go ahead and finish on that assumed name that you were talking about. Then I have a question, please.
Sure. Now, bear in mind, this is happening to your children, too. The same system that snatched you up when you were a few days old and deprived you of your identity is happening to your children. When I was aware of this, right? I had just given birth to my son. It was a difficult delivery. It was premature. I was 40 years old. I knew that this was going on. And I resisted signing the paperwork at the hospital because I knew that was how they were snatching babies essentially, at the moment that they're born, these corporate goons come in and they snatch your child's identity and they register that name as chattel belonging to their corporation. So I refused to sign the paperwork. Their response was to bring in 2 women and a very large male nurse. And they guaranteed me that if I did not sign that paperwork, I would not be allowed to take my son home. Now, if you can think of anything uglier than snatching the identity of a little baby in the cradle and claiming them as property of a commercial corporation, I don't know of anything more evil. But that's what's been going on here in this country. And when you go onto my website, you go to looking for those PDF forms, you'll find that one of them is called the baby deed. And this is just a very simple form that needs to be filled out when a baby is born and recorded with the land recorder's office, that is giving the basic information of who the parents are and where they're living and claiming that baby's name and putting it on the land jurisdiction to counteract what these rats are doing. Now, there is a saving grace. When they take that information at the hospital and they process it and they issue a birth certificate based on that, that birth certificate is always filed a few days after the birthday. So the baby remains the entitlement holder, the holder in due course. You always have a prior claim in commerce because of that. But you have to exercise that claim. You have to know that that claim is there. And the parents, if you want to do what's right by your children and by your grandchildren, you want to get that deed recorded for them on the land jurisdiction so that they don't have to go through all this as they're growing up, and so that they will have a claim to their heritage. There are all sorts of scam artists and all sorts of things going on trying to deprive people of their heritage. They're not just trying to steal from you, they're trying to steal all that's owed to your grandparents and your great-grandparents too. They're trying to separate us from our names. There are all sorts of internet gurus out there telling you that you have to set up a trust and you have to roll your assets over into a trust. If you do that, you break the continuity of the evidence. You lose connection to your name. So you need to keep your name. You need to claim everything back. You don't give anything up. You don't roll it over into anything else. You already have a trust. You just need to claim and control your trust. So, I'm sorry, I was going on with that.
No. Getting back on the veterans, I did a certificate of name change, and also did the expatriated and the oath document that you put out.
Right?
Would it be necessary now to go back and tell them of my getting out of the service to the head people, since I've done that already? I've taken the name. If they come in under that name, I'm the name holder, so they wouldn't have any jurisdiction over me, correct?
Wrong. You have, if you're in the military and you're retired and you want to be retired, you have to let the head of your branch of service know that you've returned to your birthright political status as a Texan or a Wisconsinite or a Minnesotan. Because otherwise, what they will do, what they exercise, is not your name, it's your title. So what they would be, I don't know what your rank was, but they would be addressing you as, Captain Joe Schmo. They wouldn't be addressing you as you, they would be addressing your office. So that's why you have to make that separate severance with military service.
Okay, would you please go over the last man standing as related to Texas and the best opportunity we had to bring back the national government and the steps to do that.
Okay, that, how does the last man standing rule apply, and, how does all that play into reclaiming your state? Okay, the last man standing rule is a law of contracts. And basically what it says is, even if you have multiple parties to a contract, say that George and I and Jim and John all are parties to a contract with Leo, right? And all of the other parties on my side of the contract are dead. As long as I'm still alive and Leo is still alive, there's still a contract. And I'm able to exercise that contract no matter what. Okay, so that's the last man standing rule. We just had a big adventure over the past 3 years with the last man standing rule. They attempted to vacate the federal side of the Constitution. They couldn't get away from it. The Constitutions are wonderful. They couldn't get rid of the Constitution by any of these various tricks they had tried. Our founders had set it up so well that they could not vacate the Constitution from our side. So they tried to vacate the Constitution from their side. By bankrupting both the federal territorial government and the federal municipal government at the same time, they hoped to vacate the constitutional contract. So I'm sitting here going, oh boy, howdy. How are we going to beat this one? How are we going to keep the constitutional guarantees in place for people in this scenario? So what we did is we created a new contract with a different federal services provider. It turns out that the American Indian nations are federal, but they're not bankrupt. They're separate. They have their own identity. So we were enabled to create and carry forward the Constitution by naming new federal service providers that weren't bankrupt.
If we have Native American heritage in our background, are we covered that way?
The question is, if you have Native American heritage, are you still covered? And yes, you are. In fact, you are better covered than you would have been 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Because as part of that process, we also issued a Declaration of Joint Sovereignty, which allows the Native American tribes, the individuals, to come back on the land. They had been held off of land jurisdiction for 200 years. But now they can be Americans like anybody else. But needless to say, this was a big shock to those that were trying to undermine our Constitution and undermine our government. They didn't like it at all, but they didn't have any choice. We had outfoxed them. And so the Constitution stands because of that, even though both the territorial and municipal governments are bankrupt.
Connected to that, isn't there a bank that you created around the Indian thing? And is it viable? Can we participate in that bank?
Well, at this point, there are several sovereign banks that are operating, and we're trying to figure out how we're going to address all of these various problems, because obviously you've got millions of people who need to get their political status corrected, who are owed money, who are owed property, and trying to come up with a way that's going to be equitable and fast and fair and all these other things has been quite an exercise. We have the Bank of Dene, which is the sovereign bank of the Athabascan people. We have the Lakota Bank, which is the sovereign bank of the Lakota Sioux tribe. And those are operational. The Lakota Bank has been operational for 10 years, I think. And we have the American States and Nations Bank. Now, the American States and Nations Bank is set up as an international trade bank that can operate with 50 state members. Not franchises, it's not incorporated, but members. And as each state creates its own state bank again, it will have its own national sovereign bank. So Texas would have its own national bank, because remember, a nation is a state and a state is a nation in this country. So you'll have your own bank here in Texas, but that bank will most likely choose to be part of the American States and Nations Bank umbrella, because that bank has the ability to function in international trade and to indemnify deposits. Yeah, well, it works in real assets: gold, silver, platinum, jewels. We have huge, huge asset dumps all over the world that belong to the American people. And we're now in the process of identifying those and seizing the title to those assets. A lot of banks have tried to play a very vicious game of, they've tried to claim that we've abandoned those assets because we haven't been heard from in so long. So they've said that those are abandoned assets, but they're actually assets that belong to the American people. And so we're going back around and tagging those down and dragging them home. And you just can't imagine all the complexities of how these things have gone astray over the course of 150 years, though I think you can imagine.
How do I open an account for the American States and Nations Bank?
It's not available to the public yet. It's to individual. It's not set up that way yet, but we're working on it.
Could we go through the Lakota Nation Bank?
You can certainly open up accounts at the Lakota Nations Bank if you're within their service district, which I think is 5 states now. It might be more. You'd have to check with them. The Athabascan Bank, Bank of Dene, is still an institutions-only bank at this point. It's only making institutional clients, but it is open and it's beginning to make some headway. They are looking at a bricks and mortar in Nevada. The Athabascan tribe, by the way, is huge. It goes from Point Barrow all the way down to northern Mexico. A lot of the different tribes, we think of Navajo. Well, Navajo are Athabascan. So they may have different tribal subgroup names, but they're all Athabascans. And so the Athabascans are the major tribal group throughout the western United States, and they'll be having banks in every state. And all of these will be safer to have your money in because they're all dealing in real money. Now, I was telling someone here today about the requirement of the banks to deal in lawful money upon your demand. The 1934 Emergency Banking Act required a very strange arrangement. And that arrangement was that one of their paper IOUs would be equal to one of your silver dollars. But as a result of that, you have the absolute right under that piece of legislation, which has never been repealed, and also under the UN Citral treaties that they signed as part of the UN, that you can stipulate that your money in your account be considered a special deposit and a private account, and that all of the money coming into and out of your account must be denominated as lawful money. Essentially, they don't have enough lawful money to be able to give everybody lawful money, right? But they still have to honor it as if it was lawful money. And they can't go into your account and steal it or administer it or lien it or mess with it if it's a special deposit private account. A lot of this stuff is, we simply haven't known how to work within this system to protect ourselves. You know? There's nothing stopping us from writing the CEO of our bank and saying, oh, by the way, this is a private account, and all funds being transferred in and out of it must be denominated as lawful money. This is a special deposit account. But we don't know to do that, so we don't do it, and that leaves our money adrift. Right now, if you look at if you have a quote-unquote personal bank account, and you look at your check, you'll see your name in all capital letters of some form, and that means it's a public account. That's how the IRS can go in and snatch your money. That's how a creditor can snatch your money. That's how a foreign court order can attach your money in your bank account, is that it has been left in the category of a demand deposit, personal, okay? In federal language, personal means corporate. So you have to inform the bank what you want done with your account, how you want your money denominated. And once you do that, then they are obligated to consider it a special deposit, to consider it a private account, and to consider it lawful money in your account. So even if you come in with Federal Reserve notes, which by the way have been worthless since 2009, and you deposit that in that account, you have this letter of instruction in your file showing it was delivered to the bank, and the bank is under obligation to regard whatever funds are showing in your account as lawful money. And if it's lawful money, they can't touch it.
We can do that now.
You can do that right now.
It's also the state credit unions.
Yes. In days to come, you'll be seeing Texas credit unions. Now, the actual name, the land jurisdiction state, that's International Land Jurisdiction State of Texas, is just Texas with a capital T. The soil jurisdiction state is Texas, all small letters. Prior to 1851, you go back in the records, prior to 1851, where they're discussing states, you'll see Texas written in all small letters. That's the soil jurisdiction Republican state that you're guaranteed at the county level of your government. The international land jurisdiction state is Texas. No state of anything about it, just Texas with a capital T. Now your international land jurisdiction state and your international land jurisdiction union are still standing. So you'll be seeing state credit unions that are not state of Texas credit unions which are just, you know, Texas, credit union, period. Now, the unincorporated United States of America owns those credit unions. But in order to be a member of those credit unions, you're going to have to be a land jurisdiction person. You're going to have to do the effort, make the effort to get your name back on the land jurisdiction before you can be a member of the credit union. Credit unions are by their nature private. So that is one big change that will be coming to the banking system pretty soon. And that way you know for sure that your money isn't going to go anywhere.
So I already have a credit union account. So it's unincorporated is what you're saying?
No, the one you probably have now is a federal credit union.
So they're abiding by all the federal laws that are in place.
Right. Well, it's not a bad thing that they are, you know, but they're functioning in a territorial capacity. They're not.
They're not private, but it could change. Is that what you're saying?
There will be a new credit union system that is just Texas.
Okay.
And when that one comes, you'll know that that's a private thing of the actual state. It's not a corporation, it's not a franchise of a federal corporation.
Now, how would I find this out? By calling them?
It'll be apparent from the name.
It'll be what?
It'll be apparent from the name.
Okay.
It'll be just Texas Credit Union.
Okay.
Texas has a banking website, the whole state, and it will break them down, federal credit unions, state credit unions. National
Okay.
credit. You can go to those, it will tell you the whole history of them and everything. They're great records on banks.
Okay.
What was the name of that?
Well, I don't remember exactly the name, but if you type in Texas banking regulation,
Okay. Okay.
it will light up.
Oh, and I have another question. Everything that you're talking about here today, can we find that on your website? And what about, I've been thinking about purchasing a couple of your books. Is that information in your books?
Well, I'm kind
A
of,
little bit of it in your book?
yeah, I'm kind of shotgunning today and trying to bring everybody up to date. And I do have several books. The gentleman back there, Alan, has a copy of one of them. That one right there, it's called You Know Something is Wrong When, an American Affidavit of Probable Cause. And that's actually a document I prepared as a basic primer for everybody to get the facts down. And you'll see that it's also set up to be our testimony at the World Court.
Because I need it written down. It's a lot of information to
Sure.
take in.
And there's a short version too called America Some Assembly Required. And if you can take things in by sound bites,
Yeah.
and just let them roll up in your mind like a jigsaw puzzle, that's the fastest way of getting a handle on the whole thing. It's only like 50, 60 pages, and it's larger print and, you know, very, very fast way to do it. It's the business history of America.
Oh, okay.
I'll give it to you.
And because of Texas's unique status of being a republic, how can we help move forward to get to the national convention?
Well, you can be a republic and you can be a state. There isn't an either or. It's just, again, a matter of capacity. Are you, like I was explaining with the Republican and a republic and a state and a nation, these are all different capacities, different hats, if you will, that you wear. So you can have a state of Texas, and you can have a national state of Texas, you can have a territorial state of Texas, you can have a municipal state of Texas, And you can have a Republic of Texas, and you can have a Republican county and function at the soil level too. So you have soil, land, national, territorial, and municipal jurisdiction.